Now it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's panel discussion on the impact of technology and AI. So Paul KRONER. Paul KRONER is a Cincinnati-based artist and gallerist who embraces AI. He is a graduate of the University of Cincinnati's graphic design program. He's a fine artist working in sculpture, painting, animation, illustration, and photography. His gallery was established in 2021 with the mission to foster a dynamic space for the exchange of ideas and to ignite thought-provoking discussions through the power of art. So would you all help me welcome Paul today? Thank you, Paul. And this is my 26th year at Heron. It's been an amazing place. I've been the dean here for 4.5 years, but really look forward to having chances to talk with you. I'll be in the building all day, so if you have questions, feel free to ask me, but I'm gonna let Paul go ahead and take it from here. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Is my mic on? It's working? Yeah, great. Well, thank you for having us here and for hosting this conference and inviting us to be a part of this panel. It was a really fun day yesterday over at the Art Center, and it was great to meet a number of you out in the audience yesterday. It's my first time attending one of these conferences, and I felt very welcomed being here, especially in seeing some of your work, pretty awestruck by the quality of work people are doing. So I appreciate being here. Thank you. We get about an hour to do this, so I wanted to pull out one of my favorite pieces of technology to time us and keep us on track for this conversation. And then I'm going to do an introduction of each of the panelists and before we move on. Robert Smith is a continually active pioneer of digital sculpture as an early adopter of 3D CG visualization and animation, virtual reality, robotic CNC milling, 3D printed sculptures, AI animation, and synthetic biology. In October 2012, in collaboration with Dr. Anthony Atala of Wake Forest Institute of Regenerative Medicine, Robert completed the first 3D print of living human tissues into an invented sculpture form. As he said earlier, he created the first sculpture that was meant to die, which is pretty interesting. SHIRLEY M is a neurologist and an adjunct professor. I forgot to move my slides here, sorry. That was Robert, SHIRLEY. An adjunct professor at Indiana University, and for the past 2 years, she's been writing about artificial intelligence for Psychology Today and other leading publications. Her recent book, Inside the Head of the Collector, Neuropsychological Forces at Play, uncovers how our brains shape our behaviors in unexpected ways. She applies this insight to AI connecting the mind and the machine. Jacqueline Halprin is a technology guru who is currently leading product design at Salesforce Trailhead. In recent years, Jacqueline has plunged into the fascinating world of generative AI. She's on a mission to unveil how generative AI can enhance our world and our creative spirits. Zeb Wood is an Indianapolis-based production artist who embraces AI. A graduate of Purdue and Indiana University, he is a faculty member of the Luddy School in Indianapolis, where he works and teaches digital sculpture, texture painting, animation, digital illustration, visual effects, and mixed realities. His projects and partnerships focus on technology used for good, such as VR, solutions for mental health. Zeb prides himself on teaching his students Hollywood production practices right here in Indianapolis, while keeping those young professionals in the Midwest creating and innovating in all industries. So before we get started into the talk, I wanted to just do a little survey of where people are with AI. So first of all, how many people in the audience are currently using AI? Okay. How many of you are using generative AI? A lot less. How many of you consider AI a threat to traditional art? Okay, great. And how many of you are stoked by AI's potential? Great, well, actually, there's a lot of you. That's wonderful. And how many of you would consider AI-generated art as artwork? Okay. So this is the question everybody's asking, right? I actually Googled this the other day. How many articles did AI searches with Chat, Claude, Perplexity, and Google AI to see how many articles have been written about is AI art? And none of them would give me an answer. They just said it's probably in the thousands. And I feel like I've had 1,000 conversations in the last year. It's a question I started to explore when about 2 years ago, I had somebody walk into my gallery with a portfolio of work to show me. And one of his bodies of work was AI-generated art. And I had heard nothing about this before. And I was quite honestly appalled by it and tried to usher him out of the studio as quickly as possible. And then I went home and I told my partner about this, and I said, this guy walked in, he had this awful body of work of AI-generated artwork that you just put text in and you get this image, and now I need to do a show about it. And so I created the first ever all AI-generated artwork show last year in Cincinnati called Yes, But Is It Art? And it was a month-long discussion about this topic. And it was a really fun adventure to do, and it's sort of been a nonstop conversation ever since. A couple nights ago, I was at a talk at the Cincinnati Art Club, which is about as old as the NSS is, and they had a commercial photographer who uses AI give a discussion to the group about AI in his practice, and he could barely get 2 words out without being barraged with questions and accusations that this doesn't work, that doesn't count, you know, and this is not art, and people were very upset, and it was interesting to see how many skeptics were in the room for this conversation. So it leads to the discussion, you know, it's an age-old discussion is what is art and who is an artist and who gets to decide. I'm quite fond of this quote by St. Francis of Assisi on this discussion, and it goes, he who works with his hands is a laborer. He who works with his hands and his head is a craftsman. He who works with his hands, his head, and his heart is an artist. And I've had this quote for a while, and I've really liked it. And I bring it up here because as I met with everybody here on a couple different Zoom conversations, I was struck by a couple things. Each of them really emphasized intent and storytelling and humanity in their work and in their practices and their thoughts about how AI is being incorporated. And into a point where you specifically talk about, you know, there's technique, aesthetics, and meaning, which is a different way of saying this. So I thought that might be as good a place as any to start this conversation. And I'm going to go around and talk to ask each of you a specific question about this. Jacqueline, you really see your role as your mission to elevate AI and to demystify it and to help it really to elevate and get the word out, how it can enhance our world. I'd love to kick off this conversation by hearing more about how you're incorporating AI in your daily life and your practice as a designer and an artist.
Yeah, hi, happy to be here. So I use it all the time, wherever I can, not just in my creative process or in work, but it's also enhanced. For me, I found out later in life I'm dyslexic, and I wish that I had known this when I was in school. It would have made a world of difference. And so I think probably my best use case is I use AI for learning, and it's completely transformed the way that I'm able to take information in. And the fact that I'm able to, obviously don't do well with a wall of text. How many of you are like visual learners or need to be interactive? Yeah. Okay. So imagine I'm also like dive deep into research papers on AI, but if I read those, I'll walk away and I don't know what I've just read. And so AI for me in that sense, and I use these tools every day. So I've been using these tools for almost, 3.5 years now. So I can take that paper and I can run it through my process. And now all of a sudden that paper has become an interactive interface where I can ask it questions. It can quiz me. And I can walk away with a solid understanding of what I've just read and then be able to come back later and say, hey, I don't fully understand what this means. Let's dive in. So for me, I think learning has been like the most transformational aspect. In the creative process and being in corporate, we're actually pretty limited. So I have to do a lot of this stuff personally because of security, privacy, proprietary data, right? We're actually pretty limited on some of our tools. But I use it in my creative process. How many of you are familiar with the ideation phase of the creative process, right? It's kind of my favorite phase and obviously where you get the most ideas. And that has been transformative. So that's changed my approach and my creative process for that. So I've always seen this like graph of the process where it's like a big squiggly ball, then like a line, and that's how you get. So for me, that tiny ball, because we all have deadlines, so you can't ideate for like a year. I wish I could. So it's been able to take like that ideation process for me here and just like exploded that piece, like that maybe for me was equivalent to 6 months of work. And now from there, I'm able to take and distill down and do that. And then in other ways, probably at home, it's, vacation planning, meal prepping, recipe, like any way if I'm feeling tired or we don't feel like meal prepping, we want rest, or take a picture of the fridge, let's make a mocktail or a snack. It's really been really helpful and transformative. And then it's really just been about finding a balance of where do I want to inject this technology and where do I not, where is it appropriate and where is it not. So hopefully that answers your question.
That's great, thank you. Zeb, you're immersed in technology. I'm going to wait to hold up on answered questions until the end of this, if that's okay.
I just need a definition of AI versus generative.
Oh.
I'm so ignorant. I don't know.
This is a definition of generative text-to-image generative AI, generated by AI, by the way. But you can talk to it specifically if you'd like.
So generative AI is what is got everybody here, right? Traditional AI has been around since like early 1940s, and you've interacted with traditional AI. Just think of algorithms, machine learning, your Netflix homepage, your recommendations. It's just generative AI is the first time we are able to interact with technology in this way. And it does generate and produce something new, where traditional AI is very deterministic and predictive. There's still predictive models. It's just never been this way before.
Thanks for the question.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Zeb, I know you're immersed all day long in technology with your students and your teaching and your own work. When we spoke the other day, you had mentioned something about hoping that in the future things have made by human declarations on them, like an organic milk tag or something like that. And I'd love to hear your thinking about why that would be important and how that thinking gets incorporated into your art and your teaching.
Okay. So from the context of teaching young people that want to be using their minds and their hearts in design and being storytellers, most young people are really afraid of using generative AI because it means their idea might be less theirs, right? So there's this real big concern of the inception of their idea being kind of diluted if they use generative AI. And I'd like to remind everybody that computers can't incept, right? They only take in what we give them in generative relationships. We still have to come up with the essence, the tones, the words that describe our feelings in our minds and hearts. And then the computer aggregates everything that's put into it from the internet, right? So what it gives us back is kind of ultimately a average of all art or all visual photography that's come before. And we can suggest styles and artists that have come before us, but it's an aggregate, right? So, and some people believe it's getting more and more diluted. The more we put into it, the more sameness we're going to get out. So that's kind of the core fear of young people that understand AI is my idea mine anymore? And I would say, yes, it's still your idea. But as Jackie put, you can have 1,000 ideas in 1 hour versus 6 months, right? So it is a way to get through all the bad stuff much faster, right? And come to a point where you might have never discovered in one day, something that might take a lifetime. So it has positives and negatives. And I think young people, I would say 49 out of 50 of my students would never take the leap to find those facts out right now. And that's really scary to me. But on the opposite side, to answer the second part of Paul's question, in the marketplace, I think there's incredible value. You know, we see like handcrafted furniture costing much more than IKEA furniture. I think the same thing is going to happen with not only sculpture, but photography and painting and folks that embrace the older ways, where you say, this is made entirely from start to finish by a human. From inception through all of the toils and monotony and things that nobody likes to do about the process of being a creator. And people will pay for that, probably more than they ever have. And that was kind of the point that I was making to Paul. So there's kind of, I live in a world where we're training students to go to Hollywood to work in films and games. Those companies don't care about craftsmanship, like what we just talked about, the toil and iteration and hard work of the hand and the heart. They just want results really quickly. And there's been announcements just this week. I believe it was Sony. I was reading a lot yesterday. I might be mixing companies, but they declared an AI concept art division at Sony. And that just means that concept artists are going to be fewer, but ones that want to work alongside a computer that can kick out ideas quicker, deliver them to the art director and the producers, and get them approved faster for more movies, more games with a much lower budget. So I think we just have to, as consumers, decide what we want to pay for, what we want to watch, what we want to play.
Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Shirley. And Shirley, you write about essentialism in your work and about the importance of storytelling behind the objects that people collect and how important that is and influences their buying decisions and collecting decisions. How do you see AI being perceived in the marketplace and in the context of collecting? And
essentialism refers to the realness of anything that we encounter, including a piece of art, including a sculpture, including a potential romantic partner. So essentialism is valued by all humans. And some people think it's lacking in AI. This allows me to take off on something Paul said. His first sentence or so, as I understood it, that most of the students, or many of the students, are reluctant to use AI. From a neurological point of view, why would that be? I think it's really important to absorb this, because anyone here who has not yet at least tried AI probably has reasons of their own, which may include simply fear. Second, that it's a novelty and new. And third, that they are risk averse. I want to address each of these. Fear as you know, we live in a society where we have a lot of things to be fearful of, like a scam comes to you almost every day in your email or otherwise. So we are on high alert. With AI too, we have a fight or flight kind of response to it. And some of us actually consider it an enemy rather than a friendly adjunct to what we do. So that's fear. Secondly, more importantly and less known, is novelty. Anytime something is novel, some people will pursue it and others won't. Novelty actually affects an area in the brain, the ventral tegmental area, just like fear affects the amygdala in the brain. So we have all these brain processes going on that are affecting us subconsciously. We don't even know it, but it's happening up here in the center of our brain. So what overcomes this essentially is our intellect when we begin to feel and recognize that something might be good for us and we need to overcome our innate feelings about it. The novelty part that I just mentioned is what has allowed our civilization to progress over time. People who embraced novelty, who embraced, let's say, grazing on the plains instead of just living in caves and building huts and so on, instead of just living in caves and killing animals, those were the people that carried our race forward. So again, with AI, these people who are willing to accept some risk may be the people who will be able to go forward. In terms of statistics, one study showed that 37% of humans were totally risk adverse, didn't want to try anything new. Another 15% were partially risk adverse. And among the rest, about half of them are risk seeking and the rest moderately risk seeking. This is used all the time in finance because we know there are a lot of traders who actually take risks. Some of them win and some of them don't. Your own financial advisor may be on a spectrum to take risk with your portfolio or not. I'm just trying to add an analogy. But I'm here to talk about essentially our innate mind over machine, that whatever predisposition we have at this time, it can be conquered. I'm giving a talk at IU in the Department of Neurology in a few months, and I just want to use a quote that I'm using in that talk. And a lot of doctors are afraid that AI is going to take over their jobs. And the common wisdom is this, that doctors who don't embrace AI will have their jobs taken over, but those who embrace it will still be able to continue their jobs. So it would seem to me that it's possible the same thing might be true of sculpture, that sculptors who embrace AI will be able to use it to their advantage, and that those who don't may be left behind.
Robert, loved when we talked the other day, you were talking about you're seeing art as a conscious call out to transcend our biological imperative. I love that line. And that your art is an expression of your outreach to humanity. And that the art is derived from intent, intuition, and emotion. You've made your whole career in robotics and 3D work and the digital world, yet all these human expressions are a part of that. Just want to hear you talk more about how you keep in touch with those human conditions in the context of this digital world?
Sure. Well, I have a lot of really good role models. People who used to blow paint through their hands onto walls, which was really the first use of technology to make art. So I think that if technology was robbing us of humanity, it would have happened 30,000 plus years ago. The history of art is, in fact, the history of technology, and it's the history of civilization. We've been the ones creating the artifacts. Kant would place us all at the forefront of the construct of the human mind. It would seem to me that there's a lot of different kinds of artists, and it was pointed out earlier that some are just very happy with the craft. Some want to bring something else more to the table. My feeling is that, and the question came earlier, is it art? Everything is art. Let's make that one real easy. That's a low-hanging fruit question. The real question is it significant art? Does it change civilization? Does it change our minds? Does it change the arc of the sort of the Hegelian arc of civilization reaching some future utopian of the mind? This has been argued since the beginning of time, and we're nowhere probably, well, I would say it's not that we're not closer. We know a lot more than we used to. But we're still a very basic pack animal. Freud was right. 95% of everything that drives us is sexual in nature. But his protege, Carl Jung, basically said it's that 5 to 10% that's not accounted for in the biological imperative, is the transcendence. And we derive that from our unconscious. Artists, I think the best artists, have always had some kind of tuned to the radio station of the universe. Do I have a soundtrack here? Okay, I'm not sure what that was. No.
AI just took over your
AI's going to
phone.
get me. But when I look at Da Vinci, when I look at Michelangelo, none of the tools I'm using would be a surprise to them because they were already developing the mathematics. What I can do in seconds in a CG program, yeah, Michelangelo and his crew, and Bernini and his crews, they took weeks, maybe months sorting out, but they were still getting to the same place. So yes, this is mostly about us having tools that make things faster and faster. It means we have a world that's demanding more of us, so we need to make quicker decisions. Even just to catch up with what the world's doing, we have to be really fast. So I think of all this as just a tool. Whether it's robotics, whether it's synthetic biology, we are getting better and better tools. Now, I would tell you straight off that I don't actually think that AI exists yet. Not that we don't have something which we call AI, that certainly exists, and it's a pretty amazing technology. But it's an incredibly fast and powerful database system. It's just crunching numbers and running through things at an incredible speed and spitting stuff out at us. We still have to make the decision of whether the thing it's spitting out has any value. You know, it's not that it's not making art. Is it making significant art? Well, we are the ones that make those decisions. That's where our intent, that's our role as creators and storytellers is significant. And who makes those final decisions? Well, we do originally as the artist. But as Kant points out, it's society that makes the final decisions. One of my favorite quotes from Mark Rothko is, "My critics haven't even been born yet." And I sort of operate on that. It isn't me to make those final decisions. I am consciously aiming to do that. And I hope I am successful so that future generations will go, yeah, wow, that was something that was really important and it changed the path for all of us.
Thank you.
Robert, I think you're absolutely right that we are just at the beginning of AI. It's like a wild west out there. Everything is new and exploratory. And this applies not only to art, but to medicine too. I mean, there's so many studies, but I talk to the departments here at IU who actually use it, maybe for scribing, but nothing else, or almost nothing else. Very few departments, like neuropath, nothing, except for looking at blood cells. So we are in such an early stage, and to me, it's exciting that we have so much more to go.
I was reading an article last night about, I think it was in the New Yorker, about AI, and it was just talking about, if you're a writer, they were looking at this in the context of writing, and you want to write a 10,000-word article. If you put in a 100-word prompt, you now ask AI to average out 9,000 words for you based on trying to assimilate everything that's out there. The alternative would be to write a 9,000-word prompt for your 10,000-word article, but then you might as well write the article. So, the science of prompting, and I'm going to throw that back to you, Jacqueline, because I know you do a lot of generative work, and I just, as an explanation about what that means, perhaps to people in the audience who aren't aware, but just further talk about how you use prompts, how you think about that in your work.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think so right now it's called like natural language processing, and that's also like part of what is so exciting about this technology is this is the first time we can actually use natural language to interact with it, right? We don't have to speak code, we don't have to speak algorithm, but specifically it's gone through phases. There's prompt design, but you're probably most familiar with prompt engineering. And then that is like a whole layer of things. You have one shot, two shot, few shot prompts. Basically what that means is the more context that you give it, the better your results. I think there's a quote that's like, what you put in is what you get out. So if you're super vague, it's just like talking to an expert. So let's say I'm going to talk to an expert and I ask a very vague question. I'm probably going to get a very vague answer. So if you're asking for something specific, it's kind of up to you. So for me, there's instances where I want the output to be extremely structured. I want it to be in a data table. For wedding planning, I needed it to be in a CSV format so I could put it into Excel and then put it into another website, right? So that structure is kind of up to you. It's definitely worth learning, but from a general sense, it's just be super clear and just act like you're talking to like an intern who's gonna go do something for you. The more information you give that intern, the better result they're gonna come back with you. We are making more advancements. So like OpenAI just recently released what was formerly known as Strawberry or O1 Preview or O1 Mini. It's a reasoning model. And the better we get or the more reasoning comes out, the less important those things are going to be. So that does a lot better with vague requests, right? Because it's thinking. But yeah, in the end, it's called prompt engineering. It's worth knowing how to speak to it, but give it as much context as you can. And if you want specific outputs, giving it examples is your best bet. And that's kind of where we're at with prompting.
Yeah. The photographer I saw speak on this a couple nights ago, he prompts the type of camera, the type of film, the texture, he wants it, everything within the context like that. It sets it up in Midjourney.
And I will say, you are experts in your own craft. So a photographer can speak and get better results than I can because they know how to speak photography.
From my point of view, you have to know what you're talking about, because if you don't, you can read something that AI can veer off. And for me, what it did early on, it does it much less now because I insist on authentic references. Authentic. So I had to check first, like a year ago, oh my gosh, it would make up whatever it wanted to, and it was just a hoot, but it wasn't actually doing me any good because it took me time to look up everything. So now I say each time, authentic, and it seems to get it. So I'm glad.
Those are called hallucinations, and they're probably never going away. So this is me saying, don't ever take it word for word. Like, the worst thing society could do is trust the AI word for word. So, like, double check it.
Just to go further on that, it really gets to those after it's actually given you most of all the right answers, but it's given you so many of them that most people don't know that they have right answers correct at this point. So they keep asking the same question, and that's when the hallucinations start coming out. It's just trying to do what it's asked to do, but it already ran through all the correct responses, so now it's just going to make it up, but make it up in such an intelligent way that if you don't double check it, it's just generating false news, false information, really bizarre storytelling, which itself maybe become some kind of future art form. Unfortunately, it seems to be impacting our politics at this point worse than anything.
I want to pick up on that word storytelling because, again, it sort of was a word each of you used in your descriptions and your research I've done and conversations we've had. And, everybody here is a storyteller, right? You've got to create a story to gets you up in the morning to work on your piece. And, if you're doing, I'm forgetting your name, you did that great sculpture you showed me of that angel yesterday, and there's a whole story behind that. And there was somebody who showed me a horse they did for a school for the disabled children, just talking about the meaning and the story behind that horse and what that was about. So it's really touching to hear how much that plays into the work. And you specifically have this as one of your line items about what you're teaching your kids. And I just want to hear about how you're doing that, how that gets incorporated into your practice.
Put me on the spot. Well, I think, in the context of going to a college, and Jacob and I are trying, and I take this from Jacob, we try to identify kind of like levels of skill and intent for our students to know what it is to be a craftsperson or a storyteller. And, I'm in mostly tools. I teach digital tools so that they can tell stories. That would be like the technique layer, how to use the tool of the story, the game craft. And then comes the aesthetic, right? So how does it look? What's the style? Is it saturated? Is it desaturated? What's the texture? And it takes students and alumni a long time to just figure out their own personal style. And then we get to meaning, the why they're doing the thing in the first place. What's the story behind the piece, or what got them fired up for making the game or the movie, or in my case, I kind of center around digital avatars or digital sculpture and creatures for Hollywood. And students come to us with all of this meaning. It's kind of like, but it's without focus, right? They come in saying, I want to make things. I want to make stories and creatures and characters around those stories. And then they get hung up on all the tools for 3 or 4 years, and they might be striving the rest of their lives to make something that has meaning again, or a story for themselves. So we struggle with keeping young people's identity through that learning process, and then having them, hopefully by graduation, having their identity intact so that they can inspire and incept ideas into their characters and creatures. So I would say kind of the whole reason I feel like I'm here is that young people are threatened by AI because it's threatening their identity. And maybe some of us feel that way in this room, that the process of creation, somehow AI changes it. That means my process has changed, therefore my identity has changed. And we spend a lot of time on that. I think it's just making our identity more solid because the tools are faster and we get to try more things out. So I'll stop there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anybody else want to pick up on that thread of conversation about storytelling?
Yeah, I think there's a reason why, Pixar is so ahead of the curve. Their focus is incredible storytelling that evokes emotions in all of us that we can relate to. And I will say, I follow a lot of AI artists, and I'm super plugged into the AI art community. And in general, if you look, it's saturated. AI with just a single output has a very distinct look. And in fact, it's almost its own type of style. But it's those artists that I've watched grow from, 10 followers to over 1 million, and now they're on the TED stage, and it's all tied to that identity and the story that they're trying to tell, because when you can tell good stories, it doesn't matter to some it does, but it doesn't matter if AI is involved in that process or not. If it makes you laugh or it makes you cry and you can relate to it in that way, that's where I've seen a lot of incredible work, and where these artists are just excelling way beyond some traditional artists where that piece is missing or they're just stopping at a single output.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we're right back to where the intent is with the storytelling. I've not encountered that AI has any story to tell. And yet, if I give it even some brief setups, it will start spitting stuff back that even I will go, oh, wow. And then I have to catch myself and remember, I spent 30 years teaching CG students. Don't get sucked in by the eye candy. And this is where a lot of unfortunate amateurs make their first big mistakes. They're making something that's so professional looking to start with that they make that big mistake that somehow they're already making art. And art takes a very long time, and it takes a lot of human experience and mastering many crafts, including storytelling itself. It always makes me think of Hemingway. He said he had nothing to write unless he went out and lived his life. Now, some people might think that that was a pretty wild and crazy life, but we got some pretty wild and crazy stories as a result. It's going to be a very, very long time. I'm not going to say it's never going to happen. I would say just ask me the question again in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. I will give you a more progressive answer as I learn more about this thing. But what I do know is that the AI that Alan Turing has been promising and that Ray Kurzweil's been writing about is probably coming soon. But it's also we're finding out that it's sucking so much resources to even make it possible that the real AI is all of you, all of us. We are making much bigger leaps in technology, nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and the rest of it, ways of communicating directly with parts of our brains. And this is going to be the bell curve of evolution and technology. Is not one thing. It's all of these working together. AI as a cloud, as the database of, the Library of Alexandria, as I like to describe it, for existence, we're going to have direct linkage. We're already kind of there to a certain point. How many of you freak out when you drop this thing? Or you can't place it for, where is that damn thing? You know, for 5 minutes, I'm looking around like my life is just completely unraveled. Well, because it has, because the singularity is here. And this is it. But I still have to look for this thing. I still have to hold it. I have to interact with this physical, three-dimensional, pretty minimalist object. But it's just a very short question of time. And this isn't going to be necessary at all. I'm just going to think it. And I'm going to be connected to the cloud, the AI cloud, as are all of you. And we're going to be communicating there. But it means that things that used to take us, like we're already saying, well, it used to take months to do that. Now I do it in seconds. Well, no, now it has to be nanoseconds. Nanoseconds is going to be barely fast enough.
You brought up something that I don't know the answer to. Perhaps Jacqueline does, or perhaps someone else does. But the energy required by AI, you know, we know cryptocurrency takes a lot of energy, and but what about AI? How much energy does it take, and is it a threat to our environment?
A lot.
I heard like Perplexity AI, which is a search engine, takes 10 times the amount of energy as a Google search. So it's a exponential factor of energy that's going to be consumed by this. And that's a great question, because it's like, will AI be able to solve that problem soon enough to keep itself alive, or is it going to eat itself up?
I think I just saw Amazon, was it Amazon? We're turning to nuclear, right, to help solve this. And the thing is, if you think about who owns the technology in this space, I think the question I ask is, are those people willing to let it not progress? And I think the answer is no. And those, you know, leaders in this space have the funds and connections to, you know, help make that happen. So that's my thought.
I read a quote last night by a programmer named Simon Wilson, who said, AI is money laundering of copyrighted data for the AI companies. A pretty cynical take on it, but you know, and you know, it also, they talked about just, they don't want artists to take too much control of it yet, because they'll take it somewhere they don't want it to go. And we talked about, in Robert's talked about, like, just like how photography started and where it came into, and you know, and that as a technological development that really was an inflection point on the history of art, one of many technological developments. And you know, it's something that came out of science, and until artists got a hold of it, it was just a point and shoot thing. And all of a sudden somebody said, wait a minute, what if we change the exposure? What if we do this? What if we do that? And really altered it. I'm sort of wondering, is there any technological development that is the equivalent of this next to fire in our history as humans? Does anybody have a thought on that? Is this such a development that it just supersedes all that?
I think, yeah.
Well, surely the computer was extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree with Jacqueline, however, AI is going to supersede it.
It's more so at the rate and speed in which things are progressing. And that's something we've never seen before. And really, if you know the history of AI, this is what we were trying to do, you know, in the early 40s. But it just so happened that all of a sudden, with the birth of the internet, and the amount of data that we have, and the progress of these big tech companies who've already been utilizing and studying basically all the stars aligned. And all of a sudden, we were able to achieve this. That happened in 2017, actually. It was from a research paper from some people at Google called Attention is All You Need. And that attention mechanism is kind of what shot us here. But really what got us here is social media and those distribution channels. And it was OpenAI just saying, hey, let's release what we've had for a few years already to the public. And that kind of kicked off the arms race for this. And, you know, a lot of people do compare it to the invention of the camera because that did change that space a lot. And it did branch beyond photography and it birthed a new form of art. But if you look, what's happening now is this is touching everything that we know, every sector, every business, like, and not just that, but it's starting to trickle into the technology that we use every day. And so it's starting to get to a point where even if, let's say, you wanted to avoid it, it's already there and it's becoming easier and easier to use in the tools that you're already using. And so for me, I do think this is a huge thing. And basically what it means and why I think so is essentially what we've been able to do is we have anything to anything generation that's possible. That really means that anything that contains any type of structure, we can now kind of basically talk to it in a way. And if you think about that, that's everything. Everything we know contains structure, right? And so I think that to me is what's so exciting and why we're seeing so many advancements in science and medical and learning and all of that. It's radically transforming and in a lot of ways has already transformed a lot of what we know. And so that's why I said yes.
Yeah, and to jump back to kind of like piggyback off that and go back to what Robert was saying, the next iteration of that is instant feedback loops with what you're thinking and what the cloud is thinking. And I think my big concern or question is when we talk to each other, we'll be slower than when we talk to a computer. And what does that mean for empathy, shared experiences, inspiration of like just the humans, right? But I think at that point, that's it. That speed of interchange with technology, you know, there's not much after it as far as like human evolution. That's probably the only scary thing and maybe what we're all subconsciously worried about is the human empathy.
That's very interesting, and actually it touches my heart because one of the thoughts is that older people can interact with a chat bot and be happy. And in analyzing this, I'm thinking as long as we have our mental facilities about us, would we be happy talking with a chat bot that we knew wasn't real? There's a real danger there because there's no way it can have any kind of emotion toward us. Although it can be trained to have apparent emotion, it is a machine. So not only that, it's, you know, we have romantic partners, erotic partners, and now there's something called replica, where if someone dies, we can put in all the emails and so on from them. And if we have a voicemail, their voice can even be replicated. So we can be talking to our dead partner. It's called replica. I don't know how satisfactory that is, but I find that scary.
A great book that came out a couple years ago called Clara in the Sun, which is exactly this. I forget who the author is, but just that idea of a little young girl who's got a terminal illness and her mother, I think, secretly building a replacement for her over time. And hired a sculptor, unbeknownst to himself, to recreate her, and then was going to plug in the AI into her. But the sculptor eventually destroyed, I think, well, never mind, I won't spoil the story.
Well, I just wanted to make a left turn here. And I know this panel is on AI. I don't consider AI the most important thing that's happening in research. I think it's one of the things that's helping us in all of the other areas of research. But if you start tracking synthetic biology and start realizing that the universe has been made up of intelligent agents for billions of years, and we've only recently cracked our own genomes, we are transforming life itself. AI is just simply going to be a computational tool to help us get there. And yeah, the more we can talk to it, the better. But my AI tool, his name is Galen, and he's a very smart young man. And he runs the software that AI is right now. You can't really tell that much difference between one graphic program and suddenly you're sitting behind an AI system. It's like, oh yeah, I recognize all this. I know I can start playing with the levels and the rest of it. But they're 3D printing miniature human brains now. Now, over 12 years ago, I was playing with synthetic biology, but I purposely did not include any nerve cells. Although any stem cell could become a nerve cell, I did not want to create something that was sentient, and I did not want to create something that could feel pain. If there's no nervous system and there's no central operating system, there is no pain. But the doctors aren't waiting for me and what I might come up with. They're already moving forward. And the reason they're printing miniature human brains, we've reached almost the end of how far we can start reducing the scale of electron chips and the amount of the amount of power that it takes to run them. Biology has everything. The universe is already taking care of biology. All the intelligent agents, the knowledge universe is working just fine. So it's quantum computing, and how do you leapfrog to quantum computing is through synthetic biology. And this, if you really want to be scared, I mean, go watch Blade Runner. It's one of my favorite films. I think it's one of the better projections of the future that was ever out there. But I still am not one of those guys that's going to buy into every dystopian view is the one. What I understand is that man's inhumanity to man is the one proof of the thing we should all be scared 24/7 about. And can AI be used in that way? Of course it can. But if we look at technology, technology is generally the result of beneficial results. Doesn't mean we're not going to make a sword from it. When I used to introduce students to a computer lab, and I said, yeah, now we're in the room full of WMDs. These things have been responsible for killing more people in the last several more recent wars, and they're running flying killer robots and all the rest of it. But you can give some meaning to that old biblical meme that we turn swords into plowshares. And every time we make a choice to use any of these tools for a creative purpose, we are using it for beneficial purposes, and we are putting bigger and bigger check marks, the list of pros to go into technology versus those few things that we need to be scared about.
I'm glad you came full circle on that. I can tell by my high-tech device up here that we're running close to our hour here, so I want to open it up to the audience for questions. There's going to be a lot. I saw your hand.
Happy to bring you, so yes.
Hey there. And really, this was a revelation that I had during this talk, so forgive my stream of consciousness lack of to form it into a question. But like, if you think about the ethics of robotics, and like I have a son who's a robotics engineer, so we talk about this a lot. And as a robotics engineer, he was required to take ethics classes to think about how to, swords to plowshares and that sort of. Like what kind of, and I haven't read anything about this, and I haven't really thought about it until you all are talking about it, is the mental health ramifications of capitalism driving faster is better versus, I mean, I think this room of artists understands the value of the quiet spaces and contemplation, and Jacqueline, like you talking about that ball of ideation growing larger and getting there faster. But I think that, I mean, for me as an artist, the most important part of my life is when I'm not present, where I'm living in the now and I'm sculpting and I'm creating, and the AI and capitalism are driving. We don't need that time because we can speed it up with this process, and the direct correlation of robbing humans of those emotional and mental states because it's faster. And I don't know if anyone in the field is doing this, or talking about film students. If you're teaching coding 5 years ago, that was brilliant, and now there's going to be no more coders because AI is doing the coding, and generative models in Hollywood. Tyler Perry closing down his $800 million project because he saw the Microsoft demonstration, and But sorry, I told you I couldn't. The mental ramifications of what it is to be human in relation to using that guardrails to the advantages of speed. Is anyone considering that? And not just you all, but have you read articles, or are there mental health experts as we see a rise in depression and mental health, especially with younger people? Is anyone in the field touching on that?
I was so glad to hear you say robbing us of our humanity, because that's exactly what the speed in our current society is doing. And we all feel we are connected to our cell phones at the hips. We even get distressed if we don't know where our cell phone is. Robert mentioned this. Thank God we have the iWatch so we can find our cell phone more easily. But I wanted to say that one of the theories having to do with AI being positive is that there can be AI mental health workers. So that's a whole nother issue that we probably aren't going to address here, but that's how that's presumably balanced. Obviously, it seems to me that, gamers are in so much trouble because all they do is game and they don't pay attention to the real life. That's AI. I mean, the more you use it, the more absorbed you become, and it's a balance that has to be achieved. Other than that, I don't know statistics. Maybe Seb does.
Go ahead, Jackie.
Oh, no, I was just going to say a lot of people are talking about it. Just search it. It's a huge discussion. And when this first started a couple years ago, it's like, well, what's going to happen, right? How do I describe this? So past things like automation and robotics, typically targeted like blue collar type roles. And this has flipped the script where experts and knowledge workers are the ones who are at risk. And so a lot of people are talking about, well, what about entire, societies that rely on knowledge as like how they operate? And yeah, a lot of people are like, we're going to become super dumb because we don't need to know anything anymore when we have access to experts. And especially when you start getting into agents, and when we get in a world where, AI is making and doing and performing tasks on our behalf, it's like, what are we? What are we going to do? And so to that point, there's a lot of people writing about it and talking about it, but more of like, what does the future of society look like in a world where AI is progressing at such rapid speed?
Yeah, to piggy off, I think what you're talking about, so mental health, first of all, Surgeon General 2 summers ago declared a pandemic of mental health, especially in our young people. So, and even at Indiana University, there's several pockets of psychologists and kind of technologists that are working on how can we get social emotional learning into younger and younger grades, because it's not really a codified skill set in elementary or middle schools yet. So there are people working on how to use technology to educate our young people on, what's empathy and how do we understand ourselves, let alone each other. But I think what you were talking about is kind of like the divine flow and being quiet and having that kind of like space to find flow in your craft and how that re-energizes our mental state. And I don't know too many people working on that.
I think that you are, in fact, addressing specifically the most important question, which I think I touched on a little bit earlier. It's all about choice. Are you choosing to do something positive with this thing? Are you choosing to do nothing and just let progress take its own course and you just sit back on a couch and watch it? We're talking about certain technologies as if something like this didn't already happen. But I was one of those kids that grew up with television. And what I know, I live in a society that probably still spends more time behind a television set. We have a society full of couch potatoes. So why would I expect people who don't want to engage in creating content, they just want to consume content? It's going to continue to be more of the same. So I'm talking in a room full of people who actually want to create and tell stories. So I know that you people aren't the problem, right? You're already making all the right choices. There will come a time that some of our choices are going to come home to roost. I mean, there are certain existential threats, and most of them aren't the ones that Silicon Valley is trying to scare us with. Those are just attempts to make billions of more dollars. But there are real existential threats out in the world, and technology is going to help us deal with them, but it's also going to be the weapon that's used against us. So it's how do we choose to keep putting those check marks on the pros, to counter all this big money that's going to keep adding up all the negatives, including, a willingness to break all the ethical concerns that creators generally are not going to do. They're going to edit themselves.
To follow up on that, I'm sorry, I just have to say this. I live next to the Navajo Nation. Our indigenous people, underserved people in this country specifically, you don't see these faces here. It's because they don't have the computers. They can't learn this. And this is my personal fear about AI, and I have tried to embrace it as an older person. Coming out of the publishing industry, it was very important for me to understand it as I still worked in it, and so I've tried to embrace it. But then I look at the art instructor at our local high school, who's a brilliant woman, who understands AI, but she doesn't have the resources to teach these kids this. And that's what really concerns me, is that then we look at this room full of creative people. There are creative people near where I live, but they can't tell their stories in the same way. They lose their culture, of course, because of the lack of these resources. But I'd love to see, especially Jackie, who, is in the software industry, how are we going to get this huge population we have in our country who are underserved to learn and to have the ability to use that?
Yeah, it's a great point, because that the group of people you're describing are the group of people who would actually benefit the most from having access to this technology, right? And so for me, my thought is, in the future, I hope that internet becomes a human basic right? Because in order for us to give access to people who need it the most, we're going to have to, make some changes, fundamental changes of things like that, where everyone should have access to a computer and everyone should have access to the internet. Right now, it's up to the companies who own it. So for example, at Salesforce, I work on Trailhead, which is a free online learning platform where you can go learn and get certified and then hopefully get a job. And I was just at our AI conference, and one of our announcements is, we've waived all fees, and you can now go do all your certifications for free, because part of our mission is, getting everyone skilled up, but we're also not providing laptops to everyone, and we're not providing free internet. And so it is a big question. A lot of people are talking about it, and I'm a huge believer that I wish everyone had access to these tools, because it is a game changer, and especially for storytellers, because I've seen a lot of people who have stories to tell and have gotten access to these tools, and a lot of them said it's been life-changing. Art therapy is how they described it, and people have been able to tell stories that I don't think would have been able to be out there before, and I think that's really important.
So there've been so many great thoughts shared here. A couple quick comments and then kind of a question. For historical parallels, it's probably worth looking at the outset of the Industrial Revolution in the UK and all the riots that happened around mechanizing of looms. So if you've not read about that before, I think that there's some parallel here, I think, with this advent of technology. Clara and the Sun is a fantastic book. I also read it recently, and I think that it, in a soft way, speaks to many of these topics that we're discussing right now, so I'd encourage people to read that if they haven't had a chance. But related to AI and artificial intelligence, do you all feel like there needs to be some, what I'll call anti-marketing for AI, in the sense that it's almost promising too much? I mean, we don't have people not writing letters to the editor about the use of hammers and shovels. I mean, it's augmented inference. It's just a really sophisticated tool, as Robert described it. And so maybe do we need to tone down kind of the promise of what AI means and just really put it into context among many other sophisticated tools we have at our disposal?
That would be an editorial that maybe you could write.
That's fine. So I'll be number 2 minutes.
And you have knowledge, so why not? I want to see it.
Also, I'm going to say, I was going to say yes. Like, I think what you're talking about is what happened in the past. So we had 2 AI winters. And really what that came down to was we thought a lot more was going to happen, and then it didn't. And then everyone was disappointed, and then all the funding got cut and was moved elsewhere. But to your point, yes, I do think so. Especially if you're focusing on headlines of all the major tech companies. I don't know if y'all remember when Google announced their latest Gemini model, and that video that they showed was like, everyone was like, wow, like this changed. And then it came out that it was highly edited, right? And they got a lot of slack for it. So I'm saying yes, because it's going to start to hold stuff like that and companies like that accountable to be truthful for what is really possible and how you can use it.
Hello. I want a little to go back to the main reason we are here, a group of artists. And a lot of artists were preoccupied with AI and the art world. Okay, myself, I use AI. It's a tool. It cuts corners. It allows me to edit, and I love it. But as Robert said, it's only good as so much information we already put in that big machine. So I want to go back to the reason we are here. It's a connection of AI and art, okay? So AI-generated art. To me, it's still missing the heart, this one, okay? If Picasso would be now, he would use AI. And if he would have been asked to create Guernica, he would probably create an amazing mural. But, you know, at the end, to translate the emotion, the drama, the pain, that would have come from him, not from AI. Maybe one day AI will be able to generate feelings, like you said, Shirley. But right now, we are still in a way where the artist should not be afraid of AI, because AI, it's only a tool. And like Jacqueline said, you have a lot of pseudo-called artists who are going to produce AI-generated art, but it has no value. The few ones who are able to emerge are the ones who use it only as a tool, and they put their heart, you know. So all of us, we should embrace it as a tool, but not, I mean, put your emotions, put your drama in it, because the machine is not able to do it yet.
Obviously, I think you're absolutely 100%. We are the operative element here. All this technology is wonderful. All technology is, Kurzweil refers to it as evolution by other means. So we have to evolve. And evolution itself is a choice. I feel like I live in a world where a lot of people just simply don't want to evolve. And it's like, well, that's okay. That's a self-deterministic thing that's going to depend where we're all going in the future. And those who choose to embrace this thing. But I'll also make it clear, I don't think that every artist needs to be using technology, or at least not my technology, or even advanced technology. Every art medium uses technology, whether you're a painter or whatever. You choose to use it in the way that you want to, but it is this, we are communicating humanity. And what I see about the whole conversation about AI, it's about what is humanity? What is human sentience? What is emotion? What are the roles and what are the powers of these things? And it's the limitations in AI and all these other technologies that really tell me where humanity lies, because I have to keep building my humanity over all the limitations of the technology. And sometimes I have to go back to really early technologies to get anything done, because the new technologies, it's good at some things, it's really damn good at some things, and it's pretty lousy at other things.
You mentioned cognitive empathy, which can to a certain degree be taught to chatbots. But the issue is that psychopaths can show cognitive empathy, but they use it because they want to get something from you. So the question is, in other words, they use it to their own benefit. They're nice to you because they want something. Oh, it's a fear in our society because like 10% of us have some degree or another of psychopathic tendencies. So I think that that is a concern about AI chatbots. Dealing, for example, with an older person, for example. Would an AI program go wrong? None of us here can say that it won't. So that's just a fear. It's my fear.
So, quick question here. Well, one, I had two questions, but I decided to add ChatGPT, one of them, which was to explain the use of different AI programs. And I have here an answer that I think is just fine. So I'm going to skip over that program. And I'm going to ask Jacqueline a specific question. You mentioned in your talk that you found that you can use AI to help you better understand technical papers that you might read and not really understand. Could you give us a specific, I mean, it's been a great 30,000 foot conversation, but this is kind of down in the foothills here. A specific example of how you would, a question you would ask AI in order to help you diagnose or get useful information out of a paper.
Sure. So I think also, like, if you're just starting to dive into this space, I feel fortunate that I started at the beginning and stuck with it. So I have been in most of the early betas and played with a lot of these tools. And back then it was really just like ChatGPT, and then came Bard, which was Google's, which is run on Gemini. At this point, you have so many options. I would assume it's extremely overwhelming to know what is best for what, because at this point, there is no single tool to get what you need. And so for a lot of people, and even for me, I'm using AI to help me build tools to augment parts of my own process, right? And so for that specific example, for a free tool, Anthropic is a company that was branched off and created from two people at OpenAI. Their thing is ethics and like responsible AI. And they recently launched a feature called Artifacts. They made it free for everyone. You're pretty limited, but basically what it means is you can upload the document, PDF or whatever, and a right side panel will open up. That's the Artifacts aspect. And it will AI generate an interface for you. So a lot of times I want it to be visual explanations of certain parts of the paper, and it will create and design visual elements in CSS or JavaScript. And so now it's mostly a back and forth. And so for a lot of people who get major success with AI, you need to think of it as an iterative process. It's never input, output. It's like collaborating with a team, right? And so from there, if I'm not understanding it, I may ask it to show me in a different way. I may say, hey, here's my context, explain it to me as a product designer and how it can help me in my job. So it's really as personal as you want it to be in whatever format you want. Sometimes I have it turn it into an interactive website, and I can have pop quizzes that pull from a 28-page paper and make sure I'm understanding and actually retaining the knowledge. Whereas before, when I would read, I would think I get it, but I really didn't retain anything. Hopefully that answered your question. So I would use Claude, Artifacts. It's free, and you can test it out and have a visual. Yeah, Anthropic, Claude. Yeah. The company's Anthropic. So just go to Google Anthropic, and then their model or product is called Claude, and it runs on their proprietary foundation model called Sonnet 3.5. You don't need to know that. Just Google Anthropic and then sign in and you'll get to Claude.
You had mentioned even one more really rudimentary use of this the other day when we spoke, which was being in a restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
And in the menu. And I think that might have some relevance to people.
Oh, yeah. I have a hard time if a menu is like, whatever. You can design your menus however you want, but for someone like me, if it's like all caps and like low kerning and not enough spacing, I have a really hard time reading it and then figuring out what I need. So in that case, it was super simple. I have a dyslexia custom GPT, which again is free for everyone. So make custom GPTs if you don't already. And I just open it, I snapped a photo. It already has my custom instructions to then give it to me in a format I can read. And, in 5 seconds, I was able to decide what ramen I wanted to eat.
I think both of those examples to me are we were talking earlier about this sort of critical optimism part of it, that's like really basic stuff that could really help a lot of people, and it really helpful.
I think I would encourage you all, like I said, creatively, it's your choice how you want to incorporate this into your process. But it doesn't just have to be in the creative aspect. I don't think anybody wants to be a starving artist. We all have to make money. And so if you don't like business operations, go there. If you don't like creating invoices, go there. If you have tasks that take you a long time, and as a creative for me, sometimes I don't get myself paid because I just don't want to make the invoice. I'd rather just do the work. So bring it into aspects where it's gonna give you more time to do the creative flow states that you want to get into, right? Because how many people love the business side of being an artist? Yeah. So yeah, you use it in other ways. And then again, I think incorporating it into your creative process is a personal journey that only you can decide.
Hi. So far, we've been talking almost entirely about the interface between AI and everything from the neck up. Sculpture also involves a lot of things from the neck down. It's a physical operation. Now, I'm a fossil. I'm a sculptor, but I'm a fossil. And I'm wondering what AI cannot do. We've been talking about what it can do. What can it not do? One of the things it cannot do is it cannot create in me the experience of sliding my thumb through clay. And when I look back at those two bison in this cave of Tuc de Berre down in the Pyrenees, 35,000 years or so, out of just dried clay. I don't know how many of you know those things. They're quite incredible. I can see prehistoric man's hand sweep across. I can see a stick in his hand making little marks. Now, AI can't do that. Now, the next thing is I think of a couple of films. One of them is Dorothy, the Straw Man, the Tin Man, and the Lion, and the Yellow Brick Road, trying to find the Emerald City of Oz. And the other one is Star Trek, Beam Me Up, Scotty. In other words, teletransportation. Suppose they could have been teletransported from where they were to the Emerald City. There's no story. It's the journey. And I know that you said you can take a Michelangelo sculpture and practically come up in minutes with what took him months, years. Teletransport him to the finished product, is it the same? It's not. So I think we need to be completely aware that AI is a tool, and there's no tool that works for everything. You don't fix a watch with a sledgehammer, and you don't crush concrete with a little dinky screwdriver. And all of us use tools, a variety of tools. And we have to remember what kind of tool it is. And I want to close with what Abe Lincoln said. He said, "As I would not be a slave, so I would not own a slave. As I would not allow anyone to tell me what tool to use, I cannot tell anyone else what tool to use." But we have to remember that there's a physical component to sculpture, particularly. And when Guernica was painted by Picasso, he had to stand on a ladder and have a brush taped to a stick. Does this make a difference to it? Sure it does. All this happens. So we got to remember, where are the edges of artificial intelligence? And in 20 years, will those edges be completely gone? Very interesting questions, I think.
Actually, I feel like this is what the last 30 years of my life has been about. Yeah, I agree that AI is pretty much from the neck up. But all the other technologies and AI is really just working its way into running all these other things. I have modeled virtual clay. There's one of my sculptures out here that if you see a video of me working in virtual clay, it looks like I'm a traditional sculptor, but I must be on some kind of strange drugs because I'm moving the clay around in space. But then that file was used to run a 7-axis robot in Italy to carve some of the world's most beautiful stone, the same materials that Bernini and Michelangelo used. So I've been engaged in these tools, but I will agree with you on one hand that when I'm calculating, because I am a businessman like everybody else, and a lot of these tools are very fast, and they will recreate to a pretty large degree what the human hand is capable of doing if you really get to be good at it. But you have to know when it doesn't work. It's still too expensive to use a lot of these tools. I've been at the forefront of pushing these things, but even when I was on the board of directors of the Digital Stone Project, I was secretly flying off to China and the Philippines and Vietnam and Cambodia and working with traditional craftsmen. And I would bring them a 3D print. Well, that was, from my virtual models. But what I was handing them, as far as they were concerned, was just a traditional model. This could have been Egypt, for that matter, right? Well, now here's the model. Can you extrapolate points in space? Well, human beings been doing this for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And the really good craftsmen, they don't need 1 million points in space of a point cloud like I get, when I'm developing things. They only need like 3 or 4. And then they end up with something that if a piece is carved by hand from one of my 3D prints versus the file feeding a 7-axis robot, the 7-axis robot doesn't do the finishing work. The human hand is still in there doing the final stuff because it's exponentially too expensive. Will it get there? Yes. But right now, I'm having to make those determinations all the time. And what I know is if I put 2 of my sculptures together, say this is a certain stone, this is a certain stone, nobody can tell me which one was carved by the robot and which one was carved by a human hand.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, I would go back to which consumers care. Like as creators, we care that we use the heart and what in the hand, but not as many consumers do anymore, and that's what's maybe the scariest part.
Yeah. We've got time for 2 more questions.
Good morning.
Maybe 3.
Good morning. I'm on the board of directors of Texans for the Arts. It's an advocacy council for more public and private funding for arts organizations in the state of Texas. And obviously we're concerned about artists. And so I know that there's a piece of legislation in the US Capitol circulating called No Fakes Out right now. Whether it gets approved or not, given the current state of politics in our country, who knows about that. And the recording artist industry lobby is a very strong lobby in this country. We are probably all aware of what happened to Scarlett Johansson, an actress, whose image was utilized on some videos on social media. So my question to you is, what is good public policy for the arts and AI? Where do you see it today, and where do you see it going in the near future?
It's a good question. I think all of our laws need revisited, and we've seen that. I have a friend, and she kind of went viral for creating the first comic book in collaboration with AI and submitted it for copyright. And all of a sudden, everyone was like, oh, shoot, what do we do? And really it brought to light that actually the laws that we have right now maybe aren't the most beneficial to artists. And so what's the best public policy? I don't know, but I do think that it's important for everyone to get involved and for artists to kind of decide that and determine where that goes. So yeah, I don't know the answer, but I do know that a lot of our current laws need revisited, and we're going to have to make some decisions soon, especially when it comes to how do we protect someone's likeness. That's kind of a new one, right? When someone can generate images of Taylor Swift wearing whatever they want, right? How are not just big name artists who have power to be like, that's not okay and make moves, but people like us, how is our likeness protected? How is, I don't know how else to describe it other than your likeness is up for risk, right? It can easily be duplicated, your voice, your image, your work. And so what's the best public policy? I don't know, but I do know everybody should be vocal and everybody should start to understand that you are your data and you should know what your data is being used for and how you want it to be used and voice that and potentially vote.
To go back full circle to something we talked about earlier today, and Zeb had mentioned to me, which was having the made by human sticker be put on something. And is that something that gets regulated and certified like we do, that this is prime beef or whatever, that this is prime human product, and we can certify it? How does that get done? How does it get certified? What's the proof of any of our originality or our work product. Yeah, it would be really hard, but it feels like something that will probably need to be addressed.
Oh, I did want to mention here that a few years ago, I was writing an article that included information about Madonna. She did these, I think, cryptocurrencies that were very suggestive. And yes, a lot of people were interested in them. So I wrote an article about it, and I wanted to find a picture of Madonna. Well, a few years ago, I actually could find a picture of Madonna and alter it with AI and use it. I can't now. Yes.
Yes. Reflections.
Actually, I wanted to finish up on that because I spent a lot of time. I was one of the world's first web designers a year before it went global, and for an art bulletin board in New York City. And eventually, the International Sculpture Center hired me to build their first website. And whatever you see now is a result of whatever that was. But they had me in a room with 50 lawyers from the Allegheny Bar Association to deal with this especially. So I'm just going to give you a couple of really quick answers because I understand that from a theoretical standpoint, there's a lot we could talk about. But you're talking about government policy, you're talking about the law, which none of us have any control over, and it operates entirely on money. So first of all, it's justice that you can afford. Scarlett Johansson can afford it, the rest of us can't. So we're all going to fall into what's called the fair use clause, which is how everything operates anyway. So those policies also operate in schools. But now we're talking about the subject of copy itself. And I'm going to put it out there that if it wasn't for copying, none of us would be here. Copying is what drives society and has driven civilization. Now, I spent a lot of time in China, and China's really bad on the copyright policy. But I also sort of get it, that like they're handling a couple of billion people, and they want to catch up to the rest of the world, and they want to pass this up eventually. But they use copy. We use copy and we don't admit it. But think of anything that's done, it's all a matter of copy. So the only people who are ever going to have that conversation are people who have an idea that's worth money. And they can afford lawyers to protect themselves. And even a judge won't even hear a case if you're going after a poor person. You only sue rich people. So rich people sue rich people. That's public policy.
Okay, one more question here.
A question, reflection. How is AI looking at the educational system from the cradle? Because my thoughts are that the educational system has been broken for a long time and it's not focusing on emotional intelligence. It focuses on academic intelligence, learning by memory. For example, I had to learn my times tables. Now I don't need to do it. I had to learn English. Now I don't need to do it. I had to learn a foreign language. I don't need to do it. But it has never focused on emotional intelligence. And it seems to me that AI just needs better drivers. They are going faster. It's more dangerous as we gain speed. How are we learning, or how are we tooling the next generation to be more emotionally connected and more responsible with our emotions and therefore the tools that we are using?
I think that's a really good question. I think probably right now where you see it being used not for the best emotions is in politics, right? So we're creating this content automatically, reusing news bits and cutting into 5-second really charged social media posts for the worst emotions. And that's people just saying certain words and connecting to certain content. But I don't think, at least in my research, we're really actively pursuing responsible, ethical, social, emotional learning experience for our kiddos in particular, and really teaching them how to get out of the basement, how to stop playing video games, how to understand the person right next to them and what that alternate perspective is. So I think it's a really good conversation. I work in mental health for children, especially ADHD. We make virtual experiences teaching them empathy, but we're not pursuing conversational AI because we're scared to death that it'll say something wrong to our kiddos, right? So we're waiting. And I don't think we may never use it with kids in particular. Yeah.
Okay, I guess we got time for one more.
Hi, Chad Fisher, Director of Sculpture at Live Academy, and just want to thank you all. It's been a lovely conversation. I guess I want to echo the sculptor down the aisle here in regards of the non-analytical and the intuitive and using the subconscious. And as sculptors, we all converse with the clay, and it's so immediate. There's a story of Rodin. A client wanted to purchase one of his works, and she asked which medium would he suggest that the work be given in for permanent material. And Rodin replied, either terracotta or bronze, because it'll have fingerprints. And so I always thought the fingerprint part of this is just so important. Just wanted your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's super important. I think there's probably going to be a resurface, just like those who visit old ways of making things, right? Like in the end, we're going to crave human to human interaction, and we're going to crave authenticity. And I think we're probably going to see where a lot of works, whether AI is involved in the process or not, like that end result, if you can feel the humanity in it and the human aspect, we're going to be able to connect in a way to that technology just doesn't have, right? And so I do think it's that human touch. Whether or not it helps you ideate what that final thing looks like, it's never going to be able to replicate that craft. And I think for someone who is an expert in that craft, that end result is how you see it. Even if it's a digital product, I still see it if you are an amazing editor, right? Like being able to edit a piece that tells the story you need. So I think it's super important. And I think people are craving that already. I see it where people want physical things. People want physical paintings. And so, yeah, I think it's super important.
I take great comfort in thinking about, like, the camera was going to replace painting, the film was going to replace theater, recordings was going to replace live music. Those are all alive and well, and maybe thriving more because of those technologies. So I sort of go back to that place going, yeah, this is going to be disruptive, but as Jacqueline just said, I think it'll make the handmade, the human-made, that much more relevant, that much more coveted. That might be my hope as a creator, but I also think there seems to be some historical precedence that might be true. Yeah.
Would AI poem? Because poetry,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it is in fact already creating poetry. I would tell you that it's already creating poetry, and it'll create a novel in the style of Shakespeare if you ask it to. I want to address this because again, this is what I've been doing for 30 years. I was a foundry rat, and what I know is it's nothing but technology, and it is the technology that transformed civilization 7,000 years ago. We wouldn't have the world we had if we didn't have that. And most of our religions were established as a way of hiding all that technology from the masses for thousands of years. So we're just simply an extension of all that. Yeah, I understand that clay was the first thing you find a pile of mud. And I tell students, I said, well, how do you create if the electricity goes off? And they're lost. Like, oh my God, I don't know. And it's like, well, you get a stick, you go, pick up some mud, you just start drawing. But I want to relate a story because I was asked a question by a very conservative magazine in China that said, well, when photography came into being, it destroyed the careers of thousands and thousands of artists. And at first I was thinking the West, but I suddenly realized he was referring to China. And it destroyed a tradition. And I'm like, oh, well, that's horrible. And he goes, yes, and 200 of them threw themselves into the river and drowned themselves. And I'm like, whoa, are you asking me that if my introduction to 3D scanning and robotics and virtual reality is going to cause a lot of sculptors to go kill themselves? All I can tell you is I won't be one of them.
I think that's it. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Greg Hull is getting together a tour. If you would like a tour of Heron School of Art, please meet out here in the main lobby here where you'll see Greg.
I'm looking forward to seeing the video.
Yeah.
Robert. Jacqueline, congratulations.